Hello, everyone. Welcome to a late night stream on mental health in horror gaming. I am ecstatic to have these three people from industry to help guide us through this conversation in horror gaming. And all three of them have appeared in previous panels this year and last year, and we are very happy to have them back all again. And without further ado, we'll start on my camera right or left. I haven't figured that out yet. But Rina, would you be able to tell us about yourself, what you're working on, and anything you'd like?
Hi, y'all. I'm Rina. My pronouns are they, them. And I am the head of Mythos Horror on the Old Ways podcast, where I'm in charge of most of the Mythos related scenarios and episodes that we do Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu Dark, etc. I was also on Horror on the Orient Express, which we just wrapped up. And I also ran a Vampire the Masquerade Chronicle, which also recently wrapped up. We do all sorts of horror and currently working on Coriolis over on the Old Ways podcast. You can also find me on Ain't Slayed Nobody, the Gold Annie Award winning podcast, where we're working on Down Darker Trails and a variety of other scenarios and game systems. I also write for the Miskatonic Repository. I have multiple scenarios out, including one I ran for this convention, Jolene. I have a scenario that I'm currently working on involving mobsters in San Francisco in the 1950s called A Long Day's Night that will be released shortly. And you can find me on Discord just about everywhere as the Inevitable Rina, for I am, in fact, inevitable.
Nice to meet you. And that is a great list, and I'm a personal fan of Ain't Slayed Nobody and your work. Great projects and things. Jax, who are you?
Hi. So I'm Jacqueline Bryk. I also go by Jax Romana. My pronouns are she, her, they, them, and they, them, roughly in order of preference. I am the English language editor for Cult Divinity Lost. I am also a freelance writer, editor, designer, verber of games. I do basically a little bit of everything except for art and layout. Um, I also wrote the appendix for Considerate Play for Vampire 5th Edition. I wrote a zine called Playing Kindly about safety and mental health in LARPs. I have a lot of self-published stuff on Itch.io. You can also find my work in Chronicles of Darkness, in World of Darkness, in Exalted, Fading Suns, After the War. Just a whole bunch of different stuff. I am also currently at PAX Unplugged this weekend, so I am jumping from an in-person con to a digital con, and it's just nice to be able to kind of have a lower key panel after a very busy day. So I'm very excited to talk about one of my favorite subjects with these very cool people.
Thank you. And that goes to our last guest of the evening, Jason. Tell people who you are and what your resume.
I'm Jason Fryer, writer, game designer, and general curmudgeon. I've been working with Cult on and off since the 1990s, but I've also written for other systems, including The Strange, Through the Breach, Amped. So I've written between horror and superheroes and always trying to combine the two. So
I literally had a panel with Eloy Santa earlier today and he mentioned Amped, and that's so funny. So
yep, yep, Amp year 3 and 4. Absolutely love working with him.
Nice. A few degrees of separation there, not too bad. And for people who are tuned in for their first time or maybe have been here before, my name's Ryan. I'm one of the three organizers of the Illusion Horror Con. If you haven't seen my face too much, I've always been behind the scenes. David and Crystal, they're on the other side of the world, getting a good night's sleep. They say hello and thank you for being here as well. If you're looking at this live now or later on YouTube or Twitch. And if people would like to send questions during the live stream, feel free. They come in via Twitch and YouTube, and we'll either answer those along the way, or we'll save a few for the end for our wonderful guests here. And the topic in question is mental health in tabletop RPG, specifically horror. And yeah, we'll get right to it. Uh, One of the first questions that I'd like to ask and to start the conversation, and feel free, whoever, just to yeah, it's free form. So, anyone
I'll raise my hand.
sounds good. Okay. In what ways? We'll start with this one. In what ways do horror scenarios in TTRPGs impact players' emotional well-being? Um, or what ways do they, or can they? And how can this be managed responsibly with some tools that you have used or that you've seen but never employed, kind of thing? Just to, um, yeah, what just creates a safe environment?
Gosh, that's quite a big question to start on. Something I would like to put forward before we continue is that I think a lot of times when we talk about horror RPGs and mental health, we're thinking more about how to protect people, and that in itself is very important. I don't want to skip over the importance of it. But something I love about horror TTRPGs is how we can invite people to be in a vulnerable space with us, and we can use safety and risk mitigation tools to not just say, no, I don't want this, but also, yes, I want this. And I find stuff like, the X card can be a great starting point, but also the O card, which is sort of the counterpart where you tap it when you want more of something. The OK check-in, which is hand signals, the stoplight system. There's a lot of tools that I think we think of as, okay, let's slow things down. But safety tools are so much more than that, because they can be used to encourage to ramp certain things up, or to be like, would you be okay with this if I went deeper into this but not into this, or to change focus. And something that is so cool to me as someone who deals with complex trauma, ADHD, anxiety, et cetera, is the sort of catharsis that horror games give me, the ability to put something I fear in front of someone else and have them agree with me and say, yes, that's scary, but we're here in this space together. And when we're here in this space together, we can change the outcome, or we can have the bad outcome, but we can have the bad outcome and it ends. So there's a sort of power in horror RPGs, whether that's sort of being able to accept the power of like acceptance, and yes, this is going to end badly, but it's going to end badly in a way we can control, or the power of, no, we can fight against this, we can change this, or even we can exist under this, but we can exist in rebellious and beautiful ways, even if we're not, overturning the whole world.
Bouncing off what you said, there's power in playing in horror really resonates with me, and I know a lot of other people with trauma and other mental struggles or neurodivergences, because horror is in itself dealing with unsettling things, right? And so there's a lot of power for me, and for, I know, people at my table who I've discussed this with, in confronting those things in a way we know we have the control over. It's like you were saying with the power there. I know that if I'm confronting something that gives me PTSD in the real world, right, confronting it in a game, I can look at that and I can choose to lean into it, or I can back away from it, or I can ask the GM to pull away, or I can say, no, we're dealing with this. There can, like you were saying, the bad outcome or the good outcome, but either way, I have the control over it. I can say stop and make it stop. I can keep going with it and confront it in a way I would not be able to in the real world, or I'm still struggling to learn to do in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives me a lot of feeling of control and power over it and can make it extremely cathartic. And I also like being able to do that for my players. We use the O card as well. So if something comes up and they say, yes, keep going with this, they're still giving me the power to give them the power. They can still say stop, they can say go, whatever it is. It's very much a power dynamic there that is very equal and allows us to confront things if we would like to confront them, which I think horror gives us a way to do that, right? In a way a lot of other genres don't, is confronting a lot of these things. And I find it a very empowering experience when it comes to mental issues in that particular direction.
Yeah.
As both Rina and Jax have said, it's horror is an extremely cathartic experience. I'm constantly asked, why do you write horror? Why do people love horror? Why do they love horror movies and horror books? Why do they love being scared? And it's a controlled environment. You can always put the book down. You could always turn the movie off. With role-playing games, you've created a safe space between you and the players, and you're both experiencing traumatic and terrifying things, but you're all in control of that. You're examining things that unsettle you in a space that you control, as they said. Just basically, you have more control rather than real life where you always kind of feel out of control.
And there's so many more variables in real life, because when you're playing like a horror game, any kind of horror game, video game, tabletop game, but we're talking about tabletop games and LARPs here, I guess. There are less variables because you're basically in this magic. So if you're familiar with magic circle theory, the idea that if you have a space where certain things are true and certain things are not, and RPGs are a great example of the magic circle. And like, we were discussing Call of Cthulhu earlier, right before stream. And like, for example, unless, I don't know, taxes are crucial to your COC plot, your character is not going to be dealing with paying taxes while also having the stress of discovering the King in Yellow, right? And in real life, so often complex trauma tends to get caught up in the little everyday things. And that tends to like change it and make it weirder and worse. But in horror games, you can sort of deal with the, I guess, hyper reality or absurdity, or like our actual fears, put it in more metaphorical, almost more approachable framework, because trauma, gosh, I'm so sorry. I love this topic, and my ADHD tends to go off in 5 different directions at once. But something I think a lot about with that narrowing of focus, especially, is a lot of people think that in order to have a game that deals with traumatic horror or mental health horror, it has to be realistic, right? Like, oh, well, you have to show the sexual assault or whatever, or you have to show whatever's happening in graphic detail, when really experiencing trauma doesn't feel like that, right? Experiencing trauma tends to go in this because our brains are attempting to process the threat of annihilation, or what our brains see as the threat of annihilation, through a narrative lens. So it almost feels like you're going through a dark fairy tale, through a Stephen King novel, because your brain is trying to simplify it and break it down to its component parts. And that's why, like, we have so many stories of monsters, because it's so much easier to process these creatures or phenomenon doing these things to us than other humans. And I think that's part of why horror is so empowering, because we can tell these stories that, while they may not be realistic in the sense that they have magic or hypertech or whatever, the simulation sometimes feels closer to the traumatic experience, and thus more cathartic, while also being safer, because I'm not, like, forgive the crude example, hopefully, I'm not putting your rapist across the table from you and being like, confront that. I'm like, no, I don't know, the Changeling the Lost is a game that saved my life, so we'll use that example. The True Fae. like the true Fae is coming after you. The true Fae hunter is coming after you. He's coming to return you to your master. Like that has the same, in essence, has the same theme of loss of control and loss of bodily autonomy, but it is different confronting that than it is for someone to just be like, deal with this. I hope that made sense.
I think there's also the fact of active versus reactive when it comes to dealing with trauma and mental health issues and so on in gaming versus real life, because in the real world we're often reacting. Something happens to us, and then how we respond is the reaction, right? We have to react to what's happening to us, whereas in a game it's active. We are choosing to confront these things, and we choose how we confront them, whether it's attacking the mythos head on, which is a bad idea in Cthulhu Dark,
You don't do that.
or working around it out of character with your GM, approaching things, not approaching things, or just how you tackle it in character. You are making that choice. You are going into the horror game knowing you're going to be confronted with horrors, and hopefully you've had a discussion with your GM about what's safe and what's not safe for you. But
please have a discussion with your GM. Yes. They're not psychic.
Yes, please. Whether it's Lines and Veils or Session Zero or whatever. But you're walking into it with your eyes open, right? You know it's coming, and you choose where a lot of things go. You choose how you react. Instead of things happening to you, you are allowing it. It goes back to that power dynamic, right? But there is a big difference between active and reactive when it comes to dealing with trauma. And I think that's where a lot of the catharsis comes from in horror gaming specifically, because we are actively choosing what happens, and we are actively choosing to confront things head on versus it being forced on us.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I mean,
actually, go ahead.
I was just going to say that fear is, I mean, we grow up with fear right from the beginning. And even as a child, dealing with fears was a lot easier when you could put a face to it, or just to understand it better. It's why I became a writer, and I was writing horror right from the beginning. As soon as I discovered Edgar Allan Poe at age of 4, I said, I need this.
Amazing.
But I think Guillermo del Toro put it best, that as a child, he was absolutely traumatized by the dark. He to the point that he had night terrors, and no one and nobody could help him get over that, because he believed that there was a thing living in his closet. So one day he basically came to the conclusion, I'm going to make a deal with the thing in the closet, that I'm going to be writing about monsters for the rest of my life, and I'm going to befriend this. And from that point, he slept like a babe. So, yeah, I think actually making, exploring that darkness, exploring the shadows, actually help us, appreciate the light a lot more.
I agree. That's so funny. It's actually very similar to my own journey with horror, because a lot of the games I played before college were like D&D, very, very, high fantasy sort of thing. And I was sort of coming to terms with my parental trauma when I discovered Changeling the Lost. And Changeling the Lost saved my life. And one of the big themes of negotiation of Changeling the Lost is negotiation, both in-game and out of game. And I have had, I think, 3 night terrors in my life. And every time, because of that theme of Changeling that is stuck so heavily with me, of this idea that you can negotiate your way out of things. Words are magic. The way we tell stories are magic. The way we talk and relate to other people is magic. I have also been able to negotiate with my night terrors, because like they'll like growl at me from out of the closet. And I'll be like, dude, I'm trying to sleep. Can we talk tomorrow? Can you just hang out in the closet for a little bit? And then it'll just do that. And it's so funny that like that is one of those weird shared night terror experiences with horror writers, I guess. But I wanted to go back to something that Rina said about active versus reactive. I think one of the best examples I can think of is Bluebeard's Bride, actually, because Bluebeard's Bride, you are playing a reactive character. you are playing the psyche of a woman that reacts to these horrors in this house. But as a player, you are choosing to be actively reactive, which makes it that it gives it a whole other layer. It gives it a layer of remove, but it also gives it a layer of intimacy, which is why it's one of my favorite horror games. And it's so cool that they're able to mimic that while also putting this layer of distance between the player and the character and being like, this is happening to the bride and the sisters. This is not happening to you. So it can get as dark as you are comfortable with, but it's never going to go farther than that. That's kind of the whole idea of the game. So
And that's
it's
a good
interesting.
game with
Go ahead.
negotiation, since you're playing 5
Mhm.
aspects of the same person.
Mhm.
And I love the mechanic that only one person can basically be in control at a time, but you can
And that means
negotiate.
and only one person can take trauma at any given time, but you can choose to pass off the trauma between the 5 of you. But you're always there for each other, but you're always sort of needling each other too.
Mhm.
And it's just this beautiful dynamic that I would love to see more horror games sort of incorporate.
Mhm.
Oh, and something I would like to put out here is I'm sure there are a lot of people in the audience who are like, but what if your GM, what if your GM doesn't listen to you? What if you can't trust you? Don't play at a table with that person. I
Yep.
give you permission. Just don't. I think a lot of times we think of gaming as like a second job or an obligation or the only way we get to see our friends. And as somebody who has won awards for her safety writing, I am giving you permission. You can leave.
Mhm.
If it sucks, hit the bricks. As Alex Stacy just said, get a new GM.
Mhm.
You can. I promise you, you are cute enough, you are smart enough, and you are fun enough to play with that you will find a new GM.
The feeling of safety with your GM is extremely important when it comes to
Yeah.
navigating a lot of these things, and also having that particular power dynamic, right? Because if your GM isn't listening to you or isn't a safe person, you don't have the power dynamic. You don't have the power in that situation to confront things. I played a game of Hell in Texas, which is a Call of Cthulhu scenario by Scott Dorward about hell houses in Texas. So these evangelical things,
Oh, that
and
sounds awesome.
I grew up in that kind of situation, and I had a lot of trauma surrounding it. And so I went in thinking this would be something I could confront. This is a trauma I can work with, and I ended up being so traumatized halfway through that I got up and left. It wasn't, and the GM was very kind about it and was very, I'm sorry, I didn't think it was going to affect you that much. And like, I didn't either. I joined the game intentionally. I knew what it was about. But the GM was very safe. And I felt safe leaving the table. I felt safe talking to him about it afterwards. And it was a very empowering experience, even though the game itself ended up being too traumatic for me. I had the power to leave. I had the power to walk away because I knew my GM was a safe person for me. And that
I'm
is
so happy for you.
extremely important.
Mhm.
We have a question. What's a hell house?
Um,
Just very brief. I don't want to get away from the topic. A hell house is an evangelical church setup. It's supposed to be like a haunted house where you go through all these terrors and horrors, and a lot of them are things lefties want to do to you. And then they teach you about Jesus at the end of it and try to get you to convert. So that's what a hell house
yeah.
is.
So I'm actually going to drop a link to Ryan in our private chat so we can put it on YouTube chat. Fundy Fridays did a special Halloween special on Hell Houses this year. It's phenomenal. It's like an hour long if you guys are interested in that. I also mention this because Rina, after stream, I would like to show you my Bluebeard's Bride playset I did about a pastor's wife having to walk through his hell house while he's out on a mission.
Oh, wow.
If
Ooh.
that would be interesting for
Ooh.
you to read.
Mhm.
But I will go ahead and actually, I will drop the link in our private chat and Ryan can post it to YouTube and you guys can look at it afterwards too.
Yeah,
I think if I want to say I think a Hell House is a perfect example of that, right? Because it has that real life trauma, but it also has that hyper reality to it of it is just it's not quite surreality, but it is an imitation of reality that is slightly absurd.
Mhm.
And I think it's such a good example of what
Mhm.
you were talking about, of your GM being safe enough to be like, oh my God, I'm sorry this traumatized you, but being able to spend that time with you and
Mhm.
being able to empower you, even though you had to walk away, that's phenomenal.
That's an example of a good GM handling triggering issues and mental health issues within a game and outside of the game. If your GM is not sensitive to that, that is not a safe person for you.
Yeah.
And in the same vein, as a GM, you need a safe space as well, because in sometimes the GM feels that they are obligated to tell the story that the players want, and they can get roped into exploring traumas that they don't want, or stories and narratives that they don't want to explore. So as a GM, you do have the option to basically say, sorry, we're not going to take that in that direction today. But usually you have that all laid out with your lines and fails ahead of time. So as long as you have that
Ideally,
safe
yes.
space, yeah.
As a GM, I give my own content issues at the beginning of a session when I ask people if they have any trigger issues or content I need to be aware of or to stay away from, and I give mine to the whole table. Like, these are the things, please, I need you to avoid because they are trigger issues for me, or they're trauma issues. Please do not do these things. So
Same, yeah.
it's important for you as a GM to make sure you're safe as well. The only way you tell
I
a
think
good story and keep everybody safe is to protect yourself as well.
I think it's really easy to forget that we as GMs are also players. We are simply players, and some games are more transparent about this than others, but it's really easy to forget that we are simply players with a different play set and different responsibilities. And that we need care. Like, you can get you can get player drop from a game. You can also get GM drop from a game. And sometimes you just need to be like, hey guys, I know we went through this really intense story together. I'm glad you guys had fun, but like, I need some reassurance. I need some water. I need some space. I need whatever. And like, it's totally fine to, as a player or as a GM, to be like, hey, this is what I need.
From
And go ahead.
sorry. No,
Nope, go ahead.
yeah, I'm really glad the three of you are here with these experiences, because like I'm learning, like I'm constantly learning. And when it came to, like, when I first started GMing, I started with fantasy and never really thought of GMing horror or anything like that. But when the day I fell down the Call of Cthulhu hole, and then I found my place that I love so much, and then that led to eventually trying Cult, and just being in an area where, okay, I'm running these kind of stories now. But at the time, probably, it's been about 3 or 4 years ago now, I didn't know about safety tools. And I wish, like, it's a learning experience. I wish I did, because in one of my games that I had, one of the like, you paste content warnings and things like that, but one of them was uh, alcohol and drug use. And the scenario I was running, like, I didn't have that conversation with the players, and one of the players just stopped talking, and I was wondering if, did I do something wrong, what was going on. But on the side, he had a life experience with that growing up, and at that moment, it's like, okay, yeah, no, yeah, we won't explore this anymore, I apologize. So then, at starting from that day, I've heard about the horror contract, this, that, but I never really understood it until starting probably from that day where I had, where I hurt that person or made them kind of relive something, and I don't want to do that ever again. So when the horror, when it comes to doing any game now, no matter if I don't want to put a content warning up because I don't want it visible in a public space, or I don't want people to see that I'm running this kind of game, that's the wrong line of thinking. Put it up. And if people want to play the game, people will. And if they don't,
Then
they
they
won't.
won't.
Then they won't. And
I
yeah,
think it's really easy to get tangled up in shame too when we trip on someone's boundaries, like even if we didn't mean to. I know some people who, like, I was having a very angry moment as a character at a game that I help run. It's a LARP, it's a campaign style LARP. And several people said they were afraid to check in with me because they thought I might be angry out of character, and they thought I might be angry about staff stuff out of character, and they didn't want to have to be the person I would vent to. And that was a little weird for me because, like, there's some people get very into safety rules, but then think, okay, I have to use the safety rules to be a good person. But in order to be a good person, I have to, if I check in with someone, that then obligates me to be there for them. And, like, I can't go, hey, I can't handle this right now. Can I get you someone else? And there's this odd, like, transactionality that sometimes gets tangled around safety rules, which is probably because we live in a society, in all caps. But, like, I think something I'd really like to see with safety rules in games is less shame around the idea of, hey, I can't hold someone's feelings right now, or hey, I bumped into someone's boundaries, or hey, I got triggered by something I didn't think I was going to get triggered by, because we're all human, we're all fallible, we're all little squishy meat bits. Alex says, quit stealing my anxieties, Jackson. No, I am a magnet for anxieties. I will keep them in my little box. Thank you. But something we have to come to terms with is we're not all going to be perfect, because we are, like, what, 8 pounds of anxious bacon in a body. And sometimes the anxious bacon bumps up against someone else's anxious bacon. And it's no one's fault. And we're so, just look at fucking Twitter. We're so quick to assign blame. And sometimes it's literally just, oops, I stepped on your foot.
Mhm.
Or, you know, we weren't looking and we metaphorically collided in the hallway. And nobody was, like, charging at someone else with their head down. I like to think it's fairly obvious. Like, and maybe that's just because I've done a lot of, like, accidental boundary bumping, and I had my boundaries bumped, and I've also had people actively attempt, actually fairly recently, to try to claw down my boundaries, and it feels different, right? But our brain looks at it and goes, okay, that person is bumping up against my boundaries. I don't think they're being mean, but what if they are? I have to react as though I'm being attacked. And it leads to these weird shame spirals of, why did I react to that? Why did they react to that? Who has to apologize here? Who's at fault? And sometimes it's literally just taking a step back and going, well, that fucking sucked. You know, let's take some time. And, like, it's I worry that I wandered off topic again, but really what I'm going for is sometimes it's just as simple as being kind and curious, right? And being like, hey, what did they actually mean by that? What were you intending to convey? What was I intending to convey? Is this fixable? And usually it is.
Yeah, no, and this is a wonderful discussion, and for people, because we might have some people who are maybe just getting into horror gaming and might not have seen or have experienced this kind of uh, knowledge, or how do you know how do you employ safety tools? How do you start out? In your games, if you don't mind, and for
Mhm.
let's say you have a new horror GM coming in, what steps do you follow from, I want to run a game. What safety tools should I use? Should I do a contract? Should I research these mental health issues that are in this scenario? How much should I like? What's your process if you're going to run a game? From the start, you contact your players till the end.
So I send my players either a lines and veils. So lines being things we do not touch, do not cross, do not pass go, sort of situation, things we do not want at all. Veils being you can approach this, but very carefully, and we fade to black. We don't go into it very deeply. and some people may mark it as something for further discussion before it's used in the game, or the stoplight system, which is green, this is great, we want it, this should be in the game, yellow, approach with caution, and red, thou shalt not. And so I'll send one of those two documents to my players ahead of time, and then I make a list for myself on what's red, what's yellow, or what's a line, what's a veil, and just keep a list that I can keep in front of me because I play mostly online at my computer, and know to avoid those completely. If they're in the scenario, I take the time to write around them, give myself an out, figure out something else that I can do in advance. So the safety tools in advance of the game are also helpful for the GM, right? Because then you don't have to scramble necessarily trying to figure out what to do with it just as you're getting into the session. If I'm doing a multi-session game, I try to do a session 0 where we sit, we talk about our expectations for the game, expectations for the players, their expectations of me as the GM, my lines, things that I don't want players to cross, and then we can also discuss any yellow light things that people want to talk about, like how far can we go into discussing these things or have these topics in the game. And I try to do that for pretty much any game that's going to be more than one session. And doing my research, right? If there are things that come up, like I have a scenario, Jolene actually, that deals with addiction, right? So drug use, alcoholism, things like that. I did my research before that game to make sure that it's approaching it with empathy, especially for the people in the scenario who are dealing with those particular issues, but also from a writing perspective. And then I try my best using that research and using that empathy that I've built to play that out in the scenario itself. So research is very important for issues like that. But definitely the safety tools before session 0, X card during the game, X up on the screen or in the chat. If we just stop, no questions asked. This is something to go back to that first question with power, right? And also what Jax was saying about having empathy for each other and not wanting to take on what people are dealing with. Do not have to explain. You put an X up, move around instantly. No, nothing else needs to be said. Or the empty or the open table method, which is if you need to go, you go. Just stand up and leave. You don't have to tell me why. You don't have to tell me what's going on. I will not judge you for any of it. And I tell my players this at the start of the game. We want it to be safe. And if it's not safe, you should feel empowered to leave so that you do not have to feel like you're in an unsafe situation. So those are the tools that I tend to use to help avoid some of these problems, let's say, these issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all the safety tools that I use. I also use a combination of the cult horror contract and the stoplight method. Basically, I send out a list to my players with common themes that might be discussed, and then they can also incorporate their themes that they don't want to discuss, and then just basically I put it all together and create a list that everybody needs to adhere to. And unfortunately, sometimes things get missed. So the session 0 is a wonderful tool to have to discuss these themes, so that we can also get the nuances of what the veil actually means. How far can we push it? How far do we want to push it? Even if something is green, maybe a certain aspect of that subject could be a trigger. It could actually be a red. So the more that you can talk to your players and create that space ahead of time, you can create the narrative threads that will be played out through your story, through the campaign, without those hiccups. And hiccups will happen. So the other tool is that I always break a session at least in half. Always have a check-in. So about an hour and a half in, check-in, is everybody okay? Are there any worries? Are there any concerns? Do you want more of this? And then we can do the next session or the next part of that session. And the stars and wishes at the end is in some ways a good way to do it, to basically explore what you really enjoy during the session, or what you'd like to see more of, and just basically praise each other and call out wonderful things that you've experienced during that session.
I love Stars and Wishes as a de-rolling mechanic. It's really good. If you guys would like, so those in the chat would like to see a pretty comprehensive list of safety tools. It's not every safety tool ever existed, but the TTRPG Safety Toolkit by Lauren Bryant Monk and Kiana Shaw is an Any award-winning free product. It has like 80% of the safety tools I'm familiar with as part of it. It's phenomenal. I'm going to drop Ryan a link so that he can go ahead and put it in the chat. And like I really enjoy Gehenna Gaming does a really wonderful pregame survey that I'm a huge fan of. It's like, hey, here's the title of the game, here's the system, here's a synopsis of the game, here are the expected and core themes, here is a list of common triggers. These triggers might not even show up in this game, but you're going to mark them yellow, red, and green anyway, just so we have them. And like, yeah, some stuff does get missed. Like, for example, my biggest trigger in games is tryptophobia. Like, I can play. I sexual assault used to be like a big trigger for me in games, and still is if handled inappropriately. But like, I found ways where I am, if not comfortable playing with it, at least can play with it safely. Ask me about gynokides in Cult. I have big feelings about them. But tryptophobia is not usually something incorporated on a list of common triggers. So I am going to write that down in the other triggers box provided. But regardless of what safety system I'm using, and usually it'll be whatever sort of resonates with the game. So if it's a more modern game, I'm probably going to use the stoplight system, just because like people have stoplight, like, associate stoplights with modern day. So it feels more, it's got the vibes. But the thing I always do, regardless of what safety system I'm using, is communicate the expectations for the game. Because I want you to know what you're getting into, and if this is a journey you want to go on. And if it's not, no hard feelings. It's fine. But I want you to be able to make that choice. And unfortunately, still people will sometimes choose, oh, I want to be in that game because my friends are in that game, or I want to be in that game because FOMO or whatever. And Open Table, great system for that. Sometimes people don't use it, and that sucks. But it's really the best thing you could do is give people the expectations that you have. Let them decide whether or not those are the expectations they want to be present for, and go from there.
And always be ready to let your list and your experience evolve as the sessions and the story goes along. As I was said in our panel with Rina last night, that my current with Blood Dipped Wings had to change because it explores the themes of violence, and one of the antagonists in it, basically the war dogs. They believe in victory. They believe in very clean, precise violence, gun violence. And unfortunately, just as we were about to start the actual play, yet another mass shooting took place. And for us and the player, for myself and the players, we just thought, okay, that's not a subject that we want to, explore right now because it's too close. It's also why it's an amazingly written scenario, but I will never run the Shunned. So just for that very reason.
Oh, yeah, that one required a lot of editing. There was a lot going on in that scenario, and it was tricky, but I think it came out well in the end. But there's that scenario involves a school shooting. And that scenario is not going to be for everyone. and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had a hard time editing it.
Oh, I
had to take breaks while doing it. It was rough.
I guess that those in a system like called Divinity Lost, these topics tend, to get explored and brought up, and I think that's where a toolbox of all these safety mechanisms is key to make sure your players and also the GM to know how to present it the right way, not go too far. With those, with pre-game discussions, you figure out what your players want, what how far you can bring it, how just the whole kind of comfort level of everything. And I think those can be extrapolated to other. I've never played Bluebeard's Bride. I've only heard stories of it and things like that. So yeah, no, I'm even learning tonight. Like I knew, well, in my mind, those are all the safety tools. The X card, lines and veils, fade to black. I had no idea what red light, green light, yellow light was, or even the O card. This is I think would be a good learning experience for everyone who's watching, who might not know about safety tools in general or how to kind of implement them in horror gaming. So I think this is going to kind of develop into just a natural discussion of everything, and I really appreciate all the candidness and everything. Just we'll go to it. Oh, we have another question from Alex Stacy. I'll pop that up on screen.
Thank you, Alex.
What is an O card?
I'm so glad you asked. So the X card stops action. It's I think it's probably one of the first codified, widely accepted safety tools we have in tabletop gaming, and that was created by John Stavropoulos, and we're very grateful to him for it. But the O card was created as a counterpart to the idea that, well, if you tap X to stop, you tap O to go. And there's been a lot of essays about it with titles like Finding My O and, orgasm jokes about it, which I find adorable. I'm a huge fan. But it is the yes to the X card's no. It is, I want to lean more into this. It is the green light.
And I'm going to be a little controversial right now
by fun.
Saying these safety tools aren't just for horror RPGs. Honestly, they should be in all RPGs, because even the lightest fantasy story can delve into dark subjects, and they could have triggers hidden in the most innocuous places. So it's always good. I mean, if we're going to have a safe space with horror, you should have a safe space with fantasy or science fiction. All these stories are human stories, and humans are fallible. Humans have empathy. Show some empathy, especially because murder hobos have a tendency of going dark on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't want to be at that table.
Yeah.
Well, you bring up that's another good point too. All systems, I had never thought of that before, but another experience that kind of came up, where I said I kind of started GMing in fantasy. Then I went to horror and found my niche. And there was a couple times I went back to fantasy, but you kind of use what you learn in one system to kind of enhance maybe your experience in another. So there was this one time I went back to a fantasy game and this house collapsed for some reason, but this person's fantasy character, failed to roll, got stuck in the house as it kind of crumbled down. And you wouldn't even think rolls to get out. No, it was just a bad rolling day, but it was a form of feeling claustrophobic. And he's like, no, can we go? Can we not do this and just okay, no problem. Just another learning, constantly learning. When people, I think when people say, "Oh, I know everything about doing this and being safe," I don't know. To me, everything you learn throughout life, and you keep on learning. You don't know everything, so just be open to kind of everything, and learn from your experiences, and just try to expand your horizons on.
The secret of this panel is that none of us know everything, even though we're here talking to you about it.
We learn from each other.
Sure do. And I am a huge believer that curiosity should be considered a virtue, because being able to be curious about your needs, the needs of others, the desire, your desires, the desires of others, being able to ask questions kindly and free of shame will get you so far. Like, just be curious, ask questions. And, if someone tells you to back off, like, definitely back off, don't push. But, like, a lot of people want to tell you what makes them feel safe, because it makes both of you more comfortable.
And besides the discussion on safety tools, is there any other kind of out of the box mechanisms that game masters, whether novice or expert, I don't even I shouldn't even say expert, because we're all learning. Practiced. Yeah, thank you. That's a good word. And is there any or have you used any kind of out of the box kind of ways to structure a safe environment for someone who might have had a mental health issue, but they still wanted to play the scenario to kind of get through it, or just attack it? Or I don't know if I'm making any sense with this.
No, you total sense. So this is my favorite silly recommendation. I love to give every panel. People are kind of surprised by this because they don't really play D&D anymore. But Heroes of Horror, the 2004 book for D&D 3.5, is actually what taught me how to run horror games, even though it's very difficult to run horror in D&D because it is structured to be a fantasy small tactics game. But because it is written for people who don't ordinarily engage with horror, it breaks everything down into bite-sized thematic chunks and explains them in little words. And it is how I learned how to explain my expectations for a game to someone in such a way that they will understand it. And, like, they might not believe me because sometimes people are suspicious of other people's motives. I know I certainly am if I'm feeling unsafe or unsure about a situation. But, like, being able to explain an experience in simple words that aren't like, oh, I'm secretly hiding something from you while I'm explaining this, and there are secret expectations that I'm not telling you, because that's a huge trigger for me. It's just the best way I've found to tell someone, this is what I can do for you, this is what I can't do for you. And, like, definitely get a copy of Heroes of Horror if you can, because it's a great tool. It's a little silly because it was written in 2004 for D&D 3.5, but it's a great tool.
Feel free to post it down in the chat, and I'll share the title with people.
Okay.
Rina, any out of the box things from your experience, or things that you use that aren't in the normal kind of safety toolbox?
Well, I tend to go off of what people tell me in the lines and veils or stoplights or whatever. One of the things I do is ask people to talk to me privately if they want to explain, or if they want to have a more discussion of something. Because I have had people come to me and say, I marked this as yellow. Can I talk to you about why I marked it as yellow? And we can see where we go from there. So having that note for a private conversation, which has helped me understand people's triggers or struggles with mental health issues before they come into my game. And then I tend to build off of that to help them know what's going to be in the game and how to. I've never heard the Heroes of Horror, Jax. I'll have to look that up because that sounds like a fantastic tool. But I'll provide, for example, movie references. Like, here's a movie or a book or a particular element of pop culture that this is similar in tone to, or that deals with similar themes to the scenario that I'm going to be running. So if you've seen this movie, or I'll try to give multiple examples in case they haven't seen the one thing I was thinking of when I wrote the scenario or whatever. Is this the kind of tone? Is this the kind of situation that you are comfortable dealing with? And having that pop culture reference, that touchstone, actually has proven to be one of the most helpful things for my players when they're coming into the game, if they're concerned or worried about a particular aspect, particularly tone, if it's particularly serious or dealing with mental health issues. So I really love using the pop culture touchstones to help people figure out if this is the kind of game that they feel comfortable playing in.
Just,
I like that.
piggybacking off of that, I have a very open door policy. In some ways, I have a session 0.5 when each player can come to me and we can have our little discussions. This can be considered a little counterintuitive to a lot of GMs that think that they have to structure their game perfectly and they have to keep all their secrets close to the chest. But especially with Cult, it's a highly reactive game. You're reacting to the players and you're feeding off of them. So if you can lay out what kind of scenes would you like to see, where are the limits of those scenes, what are you giving me permission to put you in the situations to put you in. And recently I've had that discussion with another player in private, where the theme of the entire story is all about familial trauma and him trying to overcome those mental scars and become a different person. So we didn't create a very elaborate background, but throughout the story, he's had his repressed memories have come out, and we've had those little scenarios, very like 5 to 10 second snippets, very powerful, very traumatic, but we've already got those laid out so that I can use them like a toolbox and inject them into the current narrative.
Bouncing off something you were saying about GM not wanting to give away plot points. If your players are not safe at your table, if someone gets traumatized by something because you didn't want to reveal it because it relates to something in the story, you're not telling a good story, and you are also not proving yourself to be someone your players can trust.
Yeah.
I've had people tell me, but I don't want to put that in the content warnings because then people will know an aspect. Like, okay, so they'll know an aspect of your game. If they don't know that, yep, if they don't know it's there, then you are violating the trust of that player because you don't know what everyone's dealing with. I put content warnings on everything that I write. I give my players content warnings for things, even if it's part of the scenario. No one's safety is less important than a twist. Right? The twist of the game is not more important than your players feeling safe and being able to engage with you and the game in a safe way.
Definitely.
That's my soapbox.
A spoiler should not be an emotional landmine. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm also one of those people who actively seeks out spoilers to better control my emotional experience. And I personally do not understand the whole, I can't tell them spoilers. Because like they're going to engage with it. Like give them the option. But also, like, sometimes in these panels, and this hasn't happened yet because our lovely commentariat right now has been Alex, which I appreciate. But I'm appreciating him showing up for me. It's very nice of him. But something that I get in some of these panels sometimes is, oh, well, how do I know what content warnings to put on? Because someone might get offended at me if like they're triggered, like they had to stay in a hospital and they're triggered by the smell of chicken soup. And I didn't put that in my content warnings. And they might get mad at me. Like, how do I avoid that? Like, what you are asking is not how do you keep your players safe. What you are asking is how do I make the bitches shut up? Those are two different questions. And again, be curious, be kind. There are a lot, and yes, it smells like bad faith. There are a lot of common triggers. You can even look up lists of common triggers. You can, if those triggers show up in your scenario, you should mention them. Like, I ran a LARP last year that was based on the book Tender is the Flesh, which is about late stage capitalism and very literal industrial cannibalism. And one of the triggers we put in the game was not just factory farming, but because it is factory farming of humans, it bears a resemblance to chattel slavery. So because we wanted players of color, and we did have players of color, to understand sort of the background and the world they were in, we made sure to add that to, hey, this might, this description of people might come up in this LARP, and we want you to be aware of that. This is not a game about slavery. It's a game about eating people and also succession, because we had a whole like corporate espionage element to it. But these descriptions of factory farming of people are going to bear resemblance to generational trauma, and we want you to be aware of that. And again, that goes back to being curious and kind, because that's not necessarily something you might think of, but it's not something you might not think of in a bad faith way, because we're not trying to shut them up. We're just trying to make sure people feel comfortable with what they're planning on engaging with.
Yeah, I think that falls under research too, because on the others, I think on the other side of it, if somebody wants to explore a certain topic, it's like you can frame it as something else. So it's not, it's related to it, but it's another version of it that won't trigger them, kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of plays into the hyper reality thing I was pointing out earlier. Like, you have a metaphor for this thing, like vampires are a metaphor for predation, werewolves metaphor for losing control. They're metaphors for all sorts of things depending on how you play it, but learning how to use metaphor, use hyperreality, use absurdity, even, hugely valuable in horror games.
I have a scenario called Safe Space, which is a group therapy session for people who have fought mythos horrors or experienced mythos terrors. And the whole thought behind it is you're facing things that are metaphors, right?
I love that.
The pre-gens have things in their backstories. All of the NPCs have something, but it's all facing things that people may have done or may have coped with in their lives that you can face and cope with without having to deal with the actual thing itself. And so, like, I love the idea of the metaphor, right? And tying it back in with the safety warnings and the trigger warnings and stuff. When you use the metaphor, there's a lot of things you don't have to put in, but but with the metaphor, you can still put in content warnings for, say, this deals with alcohol addiction, or this deals with particularly gruesome body horror or whatever. These are all the common things that you can put in, because I wouldn't know about tryptophobia, for example. I wouldn't know to put that in a content warning, but I do know to put in, say, possible drowning, right?
Yeah. Or body horror, which is
body horror, which covers a wide variety of things, right?
Yeah.
But approaching it in good faith, right, means that your players will also see that good faith in you, and you're not going to have someone, to use the example that you were giving, Jax, come up and get mad at you for including, chicken soup or a hospital in your game, because if they know that you're treating them with good faith, they're going to assume, hey, they didn't know that. so I'm just going to
Yeah.
bring it up. Whereas if you don't put your content warnings in, players don't know if you're safe enough to bring up the fact that, hey, this is a content issue for me. So good
Yeah.
faith versus bad faith there.
100%. I'm also a huge fan of the discussion of content warning, especially when you're
Mhm.
using metaphors, because if you have a monster that is a metaphor for something, someone else might read it as a metaphor for something else entirely.
Mhm.
And saying like possible discussion of backstory content of etc and like things that are not going to be like center stage on screen, you can still put in your content warnings, and like it might never come up, but it's there, and it is there as an option to engage with or not. Oh shit, I'm sorry. I just remembered something that I have in my toolbox that is not standard toolbox stuff, and it actually relates to my degree. I have a degree in international relations, and one of my specialties was diplomacy and world order with a subspecialty in human rights. And I really hate torture in games. I have major problems with how most games run torture mechanics. And the single best torture mechanic I have ever seen was in Dreaming the Devil by Dimna McCoy. Dimna McCoy, sorry. And it's a game about witch hunts in early 16th century Italy. And you have an inquisitor, you have the accuser, and you have the accused. The accuser is the only one who can torture, and in doing so, they break a stick at any point during the conversation. The accused does not describe the torture, does not describe what they look like after the torture. The torture happens, but it is never turned titillating or sensationalized or in any way. But the accused must now answer all questions put to them by the inquisitor in the way they think the inquisitor wants them to answer that question. So torture, instead of becoming a truth extraction method, becomes a method of mob violence. And it is such a cool way to sort of have that shared responsibility among the characters and do it in such a way that the power dynamics don't get real weird. And also, you're not, because torture tends to be super prurient in games, right? Like, it's like, look how evil they is, Iron Maiden, Skull's Bridal, whatever. Weird Victorian sexualized methods of torture because we're so much more enlightened than people and whatever. But I love that mechanic. It's such a useful mechanic for something that you want to happen, you don't want to show on screen, but you want to see the effects linger, because it's all about the effects of what happened and not showcasing the event itself. And it can be so easily reskinned to be something else.
And one thing that needs to be discussed, I think, is that these suggestions aren't to constrain your narrative. They're to give you guide rails. And honestly, it actually gives you more freedom, because you know what's going to be more impactful and accepted. So you don't get into that titillation of torture or horrible subjects. You know what is actually going to get under your player's skin, and they're basically saying, yes, I want you to get under my skin that way.
Yeah. Something that Kiana Shaw said in a panel I was on with her once was like, if someone tells me that they don't want bugs in a game, but they tell me that they want body horror, I now know that if they don't, for example, say something like, I don't want flaying or excessive gore, I can do like a full St. Andrew's Cross scene and go really deeply into that, as long as there are no bugs involved. And that just gives you a whole other avenue to just go down. Because when players say yes, and I think, not in this panel, but I think in general, we forget players say yes. Players tell us what they want. Knowing what your players want is such a fucking gift.
And yeah, I mean, the bugs thing was perfect. I had that exact thing where, because everybody wanted body horror, but bugs were off the list. But when there were literally trees roots coming out from underneath the people's skin, they were going, yes, give us more, give us more.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, no, I always looking for ways to kind of work around. I think you both of you mentioned just workarounds to show a horror. Sorry, another way. And yeah, so yeah, no, I think that's a good point for GMs new for practice who were wondering that same thing. Okay, my players don't want to, or I have a player that doesn't want this in the game, but let's go a roundabout and just put something in that they want to be scared by as instead of something else. So no, I think that's powerful.
Yeah. In general, I don't trust Stephen King's opinions on horror. I don't trust his own opinions on his own books. He thinks Rose Matter is the worst book he's ever written. He's a damn liar because he's written The Stand, and I like The Stand, but he's like, Rose Matter is overwritten and terrible. I'm like, have you read?
Have you seen 1,600 pages The Stand?
Yeah, Jesus. And Randall Flagg is one of my favorite villains. Like, I am such a bitch for a fascist who acts like an absolute child as a villain. Huge fan. I have opinions on that all day. But he has that quote where horror is where we open up the alligator pit in our mind and we feed them so that they stay quiet. And learning your players' alligators and what they like is such a great way to figure out. Thank you, Alex. Is such a great way to figure out what sort of game you're running. And if you don't want to run that sort of game, that's fine. As a GM, you're allowed to find other players. Again, this is unless you're like actively being paid to GM, and even then you're allowed to set your own stipulations. This is not your job.
Mm-hmm.
I was laughing so much about alligators because literally in negative space, one of the players is terrified of alligators. But she said her character was in the Amazon and was basically given over to a god, and she's like, yes, I love this, I hate this, please just keep on going and keep on pushing. So yeah,
I love that. That's fun.
Okay, I think that is a good place to call it an evening. It is getting it is getting late. I don't want to keep all of you. Are there any kind of final thoughts from each of you on just anything in using or the effects of mental health or any other kind of mechanics for safety that people might not know about that you could pierce the veil to kind of bring it to light to make their games safer.
Rina, do you want to go first?
Sure. So just my overall takeaway from things is that the most important thing is to keep your table safe, keep yourself safe, while also exploring those deep and dark places that your table, you want to explore, that you want to, those alligators you want to feed, so to speak, to use that because I love it. But doing so in a safe manner that gives your players the power, like we discussed at the beginning of this panel, and gives you power as a GM as well, without breaking boundaries. You don't want to hurt your players. You don't want to hurt yourself because that doesn't make for a good game. It doesn't make for a good story. It does not make for catharsis. You can't have catharsis if you are causing harm. or if you're experiencing actual harm, not your characters, you the player, you the GM, keep your table safe, keep yourself safe, use the power dynamics to your advantage, and to give yourself that good story and that catharsis that you need. That's my takeaway from all of this.
I love that. I guess mine is be kind, be curious, and have a plan to care for yourself if things go off the rails. And sometimes that plan can involve co-regulating with other people. Sometimes it can involve, spending time alone. It's totally fine. Whatever makes you feel better, just make sure you have a plan. And like, that's not even just for TTRPGs, that's for life. Just learn to self-soothe, learn to co-regulate, learn to ask people what they're feeling, how they're feeling, what they need, what you need. The better you know yourself, the more fun you're going to have in horror games. And you're going to learn what your alligator is like. Take care of your alligators. Sometimes you just need to feed the alligators, and that's okay. That doesn't make you a bad person. Just means you enjoy some fucked up shit, and who among us does not enjoy some fucked up shit at any given time? And that's fine. We love you. You love you. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, just playing off of that. Just create your safe spaces. This is a collaborative experience, and you're basically all agreeing to scare one another. And that's a very liberating, wonderful experience. Just as long as you kind of have that understanding between each other. And on another level, because I've heard this discussion before, remember, well, role playing can be therapeutic. It is not therapy.
It is not therapy. Yep. Unless you're doing it with a therapist, but
exactly.
Your GM is not your therapist.
Yeah.
Your therapist can be your GM. And I have seen people do this before with talking about their feelings with TTRPGs with their therapist. And that is absolutely something you should do if you think your therapist is amenable to it. But please don't play out a psychodrama without checking with your GM first.
Yeah, completely different.
Let's play with fire, but have an extinguisher nearby. That's really good, Alex. Thank you.
Love that.
Yeah.
Forever in history on the stream.
Love it.
All right, excellent. Thank you for those final thoughts, and we'll just go around one more time, just to say who you are, where people can find you, and plug any projects. Rina.
So I've been Rina, they, them. And again, you can find me on the Old Ways podcast, where we play a bunch of different horror games, fantasy, RuneQuest, all sorts of things. I am the head of Mythos over there, running Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu Dark, anything to do with the Cthulhu mythos. We are also playing Coriolis currently, if you're into science fiction and horror. Love that intersection. You can also find me on Ain't Slayed Nobody, where I play in the Down Darker Trails Call of Cthulhu campaign and a bunch of other horror games, Call of Cthulhu and otherwise. You can find my scenarios, including the ones I've mentioned on this stream, on DriveThruRPG for the Miskatonic repository. And you can find my Cthulhu Dark in Beit Al-Azif, issue 5, Die Not Ingloriously, which is set in the Trojan War. And I have an upcoming scenario with mobsters in the 1950s San Francisco called Long Day's Night. So you'll be able to get that pretty soon. I also do writing, editing, podcasting, voice acting, all sorts of things. You can find me on Discord at The Inevitable Rina.
Excellent. Jax, where can people find you?
Hello. I like that. It was ominous. I have been Jacqueline Bryk, also known as Jax Romana. You can find me on most platforms at Rufflejax. That's RuffleJax. You can find a lot of my work in Cult Divinity Lost. Almost anything that is official printed material has run through my grimy little fingers at some point, as I am the English language editor for Cult Divinity Lost. You can find my appendix for Considerate Play in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. You can find my work in all sorts of delightful games, including but not limited to Fading Suns, Pax Alexius, After the War, Exalted 3rd Edition, Deviant the Renegades, Changeling Lost 2nd Edition, Vampire the Requiem 2nd Edition, and all sorts of delightful games at a drive-through RPG and or itch.io near you. My itch.io also has several of my self-published games, as well as political and personal zines, which I keep there, and you should totally check those out. Also, because my last name is Bryk, I feel the need to make a Bryk joke, which is, hello, Inevitable, I'm Dad.
It was
And that's-
inevitable, I suppose.
I have no segue to Jason, but Jason, where can people find you?
I'm Jason Fryer, writer, game designer, and general curmudgeon. You can find me at the Otter Poet on the soon-to-be X, or XX, I guess, or the Twitter, or whatever the hell they call it now. I've been writing for Cult and Cult Divinity Law for quite some years, but you can also find me on this writing for The Strange, Through the Breach, AMP, and H.P. Lovecraft Preparatory Academy PIP edition. So basically, H.P. Lovecraft meets Harry Potter. So Lovecraft for kids.
That sounds really cool.
And we've got an upcoming on Lost Caravan, an actual play called With Blood Dipped Wings. I hope those are going to be soon coming out, but it's a Cult Divinity Lost exploration / road trip where people are driving into hell. So
I'm excited to edit that.
And I am Ryan, he, him, one of the 3 con organizers of the Illusion Horror and Con, second year, woot woot. Looking forward to more years with all these awesome people and more. And this has been a panel on mental health and horror RPGs. I'd like to thank everyone for joining and enjoy the rest of the con. And I believe there's 3 to 4 more panels from now until end day Sunday. So yeah, thank you.
Also, take a nap.
Yeah, take a nap.
Please take a nap.
Depending on where you are in the world, if you're waking up, get a coffee. If it's nighttime, go to bed. If you need a nap, take a nap. And we'll say good night.